You sit down to study, you are staring at the book, but your mind slowly starts drifting somewhere else. You read the same paragraph 3 times without processing a single word. You get lost in some random thoughts about the future or some completely useless imaginary scenarios. Or maybe your mind isn't wandering at all. Maybe your work just got difficult and you suddenly feel the urge to do literally anything else but work. If any of that sounds familiar, then this video is for you. And if you're anything like me, then you must have probably blamed your phone for this. I mean, that's where our attention usually ends up, right? But the more attention I paid to these moments, the less I felt like these distractions were actually the problem. Because every time I lost my focus, one of these two things happened first. Either my work got difficult or my mind got carried away in some random thoughts. But once I learned how to deal with these two patterns, I stopped losing myself in random thoughts. I got through difficult work faster and I finally felt in control of my focus again. So the reason this bothered me so much is because I work in tech as well and I'm also trying to build this YouTube channel, which means every hour matters. If I finish my work on time, then I get to work on this YouTube channel. But if I don't, then this channel has to pay. And even if your situation is completely different, you have probably felt some version of this too. Maybe it's a side project of yours, or a business, or a skill that you're trying to learn, or something important that keeps getting pushed to later because the work in your hand is taking longer than it should. So every time I lost focus, it felt like I was stealing away time from something that I actually cared about. And for a long time, I thought I knew exactly what was causing it. My phone, social media, and notifications were the usual suspect, because that's where my attention seemed to end up. But then I noticed something strange. The distractions never happened from the beginning. It always happened at a very specific moment. Usually when I ran into a bug or a complex problem that I didn't know how to solve, a point where I genuinely didn't know what to do next. And even if you don't code, you have probably experienced the exact same thing. You're making progress, everything feels fine, but then you suddenly hit the wall and the next step isn't obvious anymore. And almost immediately, your attention starts looking for somewhere else to go. And then something completely broke my understanding of focus. The exact same difficult task which I was stuck at produced two completely different versions of me. Imagine you're stuck on a problem. You've been staring at it for 20 minutes, but nothing's working. You want to leave, you want to check something else, you want a break. But now imagine the deadline is in 2 hours. The work has to be submitted today. Suddenly, the same task, the same difficulty, the same uncertainty, yet somehow you stay with it. You keep trying things, you keep thinking, you keep digging, and somehow your focus survives. And that didn't make any sense to me. Because if difficulty was the thing that was destroying my focus, so why did the exact same difficulty stop being a problem the moment urgency entered the picture? The task didn't change, the uncertainty didn't change, I didn't suddenly become smarter. So what changed? And that's when I realized I've been asking the wrong question. I kept asking how do I focus, but that wasn't the real problem. Because if I genuinely couldn't focus, then I would have never made it to the difficult part in the first place. I was completely focused until I got stuck. Most of us think that the pattern looks like this: work and then distraction. But what I kept observing was work, then I get stuck, and then distraction. The distraction wasn't the cause, it was the escape. And suddenly the urgency thing started making sense. Because when deadline is close, the work doesn't get easier, the bug is still confusing. The only difference is that leaving stops being an option. Instead of escaping the feeling of being stuck, you stay with it. Which led me to a much more interesting question. If urgency works because it forces us to stay, can we train that without waiting for an emergency? And that's exactly what I started experimenting with. Once I realized that the problem wasn't focus, I stopped trying to train focus. Instead, I started training my ability to stay with the problem. So whenever I got stuck, I stopped measuring success with whether I solved the problem or not, and started measuring success with whether I stayed with the problem. Could I stay for one more minute? Could I make one more attempt? Could I explore one more idea before leaving? That's it. Because every time I instantly switched task after getting stuck, I was teaching my brain stuck means leave. But every time I stayed a little longer, even though I didn't want to, I was teaching it stuck means stay. And after doing this over and over again, something interesting started happening. Being stuck stopped feeling like an emergency. The urge to escape got weaker. I recovered faster when my attention drifted, and difficult work stopped feeling like something I had to constantly fight against. Not because I learned how to focus, but because I learned how to stay. So the next time you catch yourself reaching for your phone, opening another tab, or checking notification, don't ask why can't I focus. Ask, am I distracted or am I just stuck? Because these are two completely different problems. And if you're stuck, then you're probably much closer to real focus than you think. But even after I stopped running away from difficult work, there was another problem. I could be sitting right in front of the task trying to work, but somehow my mind would still be somewhere else, thinking about a conversation from yesterday or a one that didn't happen yet, planning the future, replaying the past. Sometimes I'd even catch myself arguing with people in scenarios that didn't even exist. And before I knew it, 5 or 10 minutes had already passed. My eyes were on the screen the entire time, but my attention wasn't. And for a long time, I thought this meant I had bad focus. But then I started noticing something strange. This wasn't only happening while I was working, it was happening while I was eating, while driving, while brushing my teeth. I was constantly doing one thing and thinking about another. And the weird part was that most of the time I wouldn't even notice it. My attention would leave and I'll just automatically go with it. And that's when I realized something. Maybe the problem isn't that our mind wanders, because honestly, that's what our minds do. They create memories, plans, worries, regrets, fantasies all day long. The problem is that we follow every single one of them. The more attention I paid to this, the more I realized that I have been practicing this habit for years. A thought appears and I follow it. A worry appears, I follow it. An urge appears and I follow it. And after enough repetition, this becomes almost automatic. Which made me wonder, like, if attention can be trained to leave, can it be trained to come back as well? So I started experimenting with something simple. Instead of only trying to practice focus while working, I started practicing it throughout the day, like while eating, driving, brushing my teeth. Just noticing when my attention left and trying to bring it back. But the problem was that I kept forgetting to practice it. And maybe you have also experienced this. You come across an idea that makes total sense, then you practice it for a day or two, and then you completely forget about it. That's exactly what was happening to me. So I made it harder to forget. I created a Google Sheet with activities that I do throughout the day. And before starting any of them, I would quickly start a timer on my phone. 10 minutes for a bath, 20 minutes for a meal, whatever made sense. The timer wasn't there to keep me focused. It was there to remind me that this was practice. For the next few minutes, every time my attention wandered, my job was to simply notice it and bring it back. And when I'm done with the task, I would give myself a check mark in the sheet. It sounds ridiculously simple, but it works much better than relying just on memory. Because instead of hoping that I would remember to practice focus, the reminder is built into the activity itself. And something interesting started happening. I began noticing my attention leave more often. At first, that felt like I was getting worse, but then I realized that you can't bring your attention back until you notice that it's gone. And every time I noticed it and came back, I was getting better and better at focusing on my work. But there was still one thing making this difficult. My mind felt crowded. There were always some unfinished thoughts floating around in my head, like things I needed to do, things I needed to remember, ideas I didn't want to lose, and all of them were competing for my attention. And that's when I started journaling. And honestly, I used to think that journaling was cringe. But eventually, I realized that I wasn't doing it to write something profound. I was doing it to clear up space in my mind. Before work, I used to spend few minutes dumping everything onto a page. Ideas, worries, tasks, frustration, everything that was bouncing around in my head. And what surprised me wasn't that I suddenly became more focused. It was that my mind became much quieter. I had less to carry, less to remember, and less things competing for my attention. And when I combined these two things, clearing my mind and bringing back attention, something started changing. Not because my mind stopped wandering, it still does, it will probably always win. But now I notice it faster and I come back faster. Because focus isn't the ability to never lose attention, it's the ability to bring it back. Which means the next time your mind wanders or the next time you get stuck on something difficult, you don't need to panic, you don't need to start over, and you definitely don't need to convince yourself that you're bad at focusing. You just need to do the same thing you have practiced this entire video. Stay and come back. Because at the end of the day, every focus problem comes down to one of these two things. Either work got difficult and you left, or your mind wandered and you followed it. So learn to stay with the first and learn to come back from the second. And focus stops feeling as complicated as it used to. And if you're trying to spend more time on things that matters to you, then consider subscribing. And I'll see you in the next one.